Welcome to the Introverted Doctor Podcast, the podcast that uncovers myths, mistakes, and misconceptions that keeps healthcare professionals back from living their best life at work, home, and play. I'm Dr. Lalit Chawla, and with each episode, I'll be focusing on different aspects such as communication techniques, mindset, routines, tools, and strategies with the goal to show how to eliminate anxiety, trip-ups, and unwelcome results that come from ineffective communications. Welcome. I hope you're doing awesome. Now, this podcast can also be seen by video by going to theintroverteddoctor.com because this is about PowerPoint presentations, and this is part 4 of how to give memorable and impactful presentations. And I'm going to talk about nervousness and a whole lot more. But before I do that, I want to say thank you for all the people who emailed me or phoned me or contacted me and found that the last 3 episodes were very helpful for them. So really thank you for taking the time for just saying that you found that useful. So this part is really about how to calm our nerves and how to be less nervous. So just a quick recap. In the previous episode, I talked about how the first episode of the presentations was we should formulate our goal, what we want our audience to know. And there are really only 3 things. Do we want to empower them? Do we want to educate them? Do we want to entertain them? And then in the second podcast, I go into detail about doing a needs assessment about who your audience is. That goes into detail, and specifically, the better you know your audience, the better you can deliver that message with the most effectiveness. So that was part 2 of that. And then part 3 was really about the delivery, really the how you actually make it happen. And everything really depends on the delivery once you've got your message done. Today, I'm also going to share about some really super cool techniques on the delivery. This episode is really going to be packed with some really juicy information, some secrets, and some tips that top speakers use. If you only listen to any one of those 4, this episode is probably the best one because this will give you an edge on everything that you do. So that previous episode, we talked about how voice, stories, humor is useful in the way you deliver your presentation. And in the next episode after this, I'm going to be sharing with you the interview I did with Roger Love, the world's #1 voice coach, the voice coach to celebrities such as Gwen Stefani, Tony Robbins, Reese Witherspoon, Jeff Bridges, so on. And that interview really demystifies and he clarifies myths on how we can really use our voice to connect or disconnect with people. That's something that I'm really excited to share with you, and that'll be on the next episode. But let's just dive in. If you remember nothing else about that previous framework, another way to look at what we're going to be talking about is really the 5 W's and the 1 H. So previously, what is your topic and why are you speaking? That refers to what your goal is, and that was what we talked about previously. The next part is who your audience is. That's the needs assessment. The next part is the how. How do you deliver it? This is just another framework on how to look at things. And on this topic today, we're going to talk about the where and when, plus a whole lot more that will give you the edge when you are giving your best presentation so that people remember what you're talking about. So I want you to think about this in 3 ways. And there's 3 main areas that we're going to talk about. The first one is, what do we do about way before we're even going to actually give the presentation? The next part is what happens just before, maybe a day before, 15 minutes before. What do we need to do to calm our nerves so that we don't feel anxious. And the last part is, what are we going to do during the presentation so that we deliver the message, so we deliver our point and we resonate the way we want our audience to hear exactly what we're talking about. That's the framework that I'm going to use. So let's just dive into way before the presentation. Months before, weeks before, this is what the first thing you should do is practice in front of a mirror or audience and time it. This really helps settle the nerves when you start speaking and start looking at your PowerPoint. Too many times people just do the PowerPoint and they just leave it at that, and they just say, okay, and they just think about it in their head, and that's it. They don't actually time it out. It's well worth the effort to time it. And especially if it's a presentation that you're going to do often, it's useful to know, say for instance, you're doing a presentation and it's going to take an hour. Well, you want to make sure that you covered that hour, or if all of a sudden now something happens and now your presentation, you only have 30 minutes. Well, you also need to know where you need to cut back on. And the best speakers have spent the time to time it. And when you time it and rehearse it in front of an audience, you actually do better. The other thing is, when rehearsing, it's good to actually get up and pretend you're talking to an audience. Don't sit in front of the computer or laptop and just go at it slide by slide. That is very different than actually physically vocalizing each point and talking it through. The next thing is back up your presentation at least in 3 ways. How many times have you seen people, they just have, they've missed a couple slides, or the IT person didn't put it in, or they're struggling to get the equipment working. I've seen that enough times to make sure that I talk about it. Back it up in 3 ways. Use 2 USBs. I actually pack it in separate, one in a check-in, one in a carry-on, and I also email one to myself. You can also email it to the organizer so that they have it. So back up your presentation. You don't want to lose your presentation, so that's the key thing. The next thing is, well before, when you're talking to the organization or wherever you're going to speak, ask about the room, see the room, and know the speaking area that you're talking about. So are you going to be speaking in a huge room for 300 people, but your audience is only 10? If that's the case, you're going to have to change either the room or the setting. And it's good to see the room. Recently, I was speaking in St. John's, Newfoundland, and I had the pleasure to speak and really, if it could have gone really bad, but where I was speaking, right behind me was a huge wall, 25 feet of just glass, looking out onto the harbor. Spectacular view. We were looking down there. Now, if I didn't know that existed, I would have said, okay, look, we need to do something. The only reason I agreed to do it there was because I knew it was at nighttime, so the whole thing was going to be black. Otherwise, it was going to be tremendously difficult for me to compete against an oceanic view. So know where you're going to speak, and ask the organizers to even send you pictures of the area or the room that you're going to speak in. So psychologically, you'll feel more comfortable. And know the speaking area. Are you going to be up on a raised stage? Are you going to be 3 feet high and looking down on your audience? Maybe you are. But if you're not prepared for that mentally, it is really going to create a greater distance. All of a sudden, you thought you're just going to be on a 1-foot stage, or you're going to be level to level eye contact, and now you're 3 feet up. It's a different dynamics. So it's important to ask about the room, see the room, and know the speaking area. Here's the next thing. When are you speaking? That's a question that people forget to ask is, am I going to be speaking early in the morning? Some conferences, you have to speak at 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock? Are you that speaker? Are you the speaker after lunch? That's typically one of the hardest times to speak because people just ate lunch and they're going to fall asleep. So when you know the time you're going to speak, that'll help you know if you need to gauge the energy. Do you need to increase the interaction between you and the audience? Do you need to use some type of interaction that will get them standing up, especially after lunch? Those are very important aspects of knowing when you're going to give your talk. That's important. And the big question is, ask them, is there going to be an IT support before you're about to give your talk? Or is there going to be IT support during your talk? Because that's going to be key. If something goes mechanically wrong, are you going to be able to get help on the fly if you need it? Always think of what could go wrong, and if you do think about what could go wrong, you know how to better combat that. And it's even good to think about, well, what happens if you lose all your PowerPoint presentation? How are you going to adapt? The best speakers know how to adapt when things are not going in their favor. Be that speaker, because when you ask that question, it'll help you. The other aspect is it's also good to have a wireless microphone. I always ask for a wireless microphone because I'm always doing some magic and I need my hands free. But the other aspect of it is it allows you to get out in front of the podium or the pedestal, wherever you're speaking, and you're able to move around the stage more, and you're able to connect and see the audience better. That is a big aspect, and so a wireless microphone is useful. If they don't have a wireless, make sure they have a microphone. Nothing is more annoying when people cannot hear you speak. And that's why knowing how to use your voice, how to project, is very useful, especially in situations where they may not have a microphone. And that is a whole new discussion that actually would lend me to also promote the next interview that I'm going to be sharing with you, and that's with Roger Love, about how we use our voice so that people hear our message. So now getting back to the three main areas that I want to talk about now just before you're about to give your talk, whether it's the day before, 15 minutes before. What do you need to do? This is the time when our nerves get a little bit rallied up. This is the time when you start to get the butterflies and you're trying to settle the nerves a bit more. And this is really the point when you're like, oh, should I have done this talk? Should I have agreed to it? That's when things get better. Once you get going, our nerves kind of settle a little bit. So this is why this part is so important, just before you're about to give the speech. So again, this is a little bit different, but I want you to think about, you should see the room, walk the room, set the room. If you go to the conference the day before and you know where you're going to speak, go in there and walk around and get comfortable with it. And just you'll get more comfortable. If you think about, I don't know if you recall the first time you ever went to a new clinic or a new place at work. I remember the first time I started as a medical student, and I was going on the ward, and there's the nursing station, and I stood on the other side. I didn't feel comfortable to go around. It took me, a few times to walk behind the nurse's desk and get comfortable with that space. It took a while. But once you start doing it several times, then all of a sudden that area becomes very comfortable for you. I don't know if you've had that experience, but then all of a sudden it feels like home. Now you go to the hospital, you go to the clinic, you're like, you just sit down in the nursing station, you walk into one part, you walk into any area of the hospital that you're familiar with, it's comfortable. And the reason that is is because you've had repetitive exposure to it. The reason you're comfortable at your own home is because you've just been there so often. And that's why seeing the room, walking the room, visualizing that area helps you become more comfortable. And that really will settle the nerves down tremendously. Because when you go up there and you start walking and you start looking and you think, okay, that's where the audience is going to be. And then it's also useful to see what type of tables or chairs are going to be present. Are you going to have round tables everywhere? Or are they going to be theater style? That's an important question to ask your spectators, the organization that's hiring you to speak. And the other important thing is to check who's going to be speaking before you, because then you know if you need time to rearrange that room. So that's important. The other thing is, if you have a room and say a room is designed to fit 300 people, but your audience is 40 or 50 or less, you want to make sure that you have the chairs set up so that they're closer to you. And you want to create a more intimate environment so that you connect with them. And people who are in the back, or they come in, ask them to come up. That's an important aspect. If your talk requires you to be more, where you're sitting in a circle-like fashion, you want to be able to set that room properly. The room should fit to the size of the audience. I've already touched that. I'm not going to mention that again. You may also need to tell the organizer that if I'm going to be speaking to 500 people, how big is the room? Next thing is remove the podium and any barriers that is between you and the audience. If you listen to the interview I had with Mark Bowden, who is the world expert on body language, he will tell you that anything that puts a barrier between you and the patient or you and the audience will decrease the level of effectiveness and trust that you will build. If you even look at podiums, they're really about, for most people, I'm the average height. It covers me about chest, up to my chest. And all you really see is my head. I'm just like a bobbling head behind this big podium. And that is not ideal at all. The audience doesn't see you. If for you yourself, you may feel comfortable behind a podium because you can hide behind it, but it's not going to connect you to the audience the way you want to connect with. So a good thing is step aside, have the podium beside you, and if you feel comfortable, have your arm on the podium, and that will connect you to the podium. If you feel it's like a security blanket, you will feel as big as the podium. And the other thing is maybe your laptop and is there, so you need to reference it, but you can step aside. That is very useful for you so that you can see your visual aids. That's the other aspect. And next part is just before is arrive early, test the equipment, and ask for help when you need to, and wear a wireless mic. It always pays to arrive early because, the early bird gets the worm, early word gets the AV guy, early word gets the IT guy, early word gets everything set up properly. So arrive early. Next is invite, chat, and break the fourth wall with the audience. Even if you're going to be introduced, you're going to be introduced by a speaker. When people start coming in, invite them to come up closer, especially if you have more seats than there are people that are coming. Invite them to come closer. People will come closer and start chatting with them. Ask them, how are you enjoying the conference? Where are you from? What's been the best part? When you start talking to individuals, it will ease your tension. It will ease your anxiety, because now you start developing friendships there. It's very easy if you think about it. Are you not more comfortable talking to your friends? You're at a dinner party or at home, very easy to talk to. So when you start talking to people like that, you're breaking that fourth wall. And the fourth wall in theater is really what we call when the actors are on stage and there's an invisible fourth wall. You, as the presenter, want to remove that. And that's by engaging and talking with the audience. So start chatting it up early with them. And that'll also serve you later when you're speaking, because you'll have some friendly faces right there that you can connect with. So that is just before the presentation. And finally, we come to during the presentation. You're up there, you're ready to speak. This is things to think about during. Hello, handouts, and hold questions. So you introduce yourself, you say, hi, I'm Dr. Lalit Chavla. Hope everybody's doing great. And thank you for coming. And thank you for taking the time to join me today. And you may want to say, some housekeeping tips. The washroom is there. And if you have handouts, say my talk is on a handout or on a PowerPoint, which I'll share with you at the end, so you don't have to take any notes if you feel you don't need to. And if you have any questions, could you, kindly hold that for the end of the talk, and I'd be happy to engage in that way. That's very important, because if you have a handout and you give them the handout of your PowerPoint right away, I don't know about you, but I start looking ahead at all the things that is about to come. Am I the only one? Do you agree? That is exactly what most people do. They look ahead and they start, the surprise element is over. So you've already now distracted from what you're about to speak. If you are going to use a handout in real time, leave areas blank. So say you have something, it says the 4 key energies, the 4 ways to get more energy, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, leave that part on your handout blank and have them fill it out. That's interactive. That incorporates the kinesthetic and engagement with the audience. And that's a good way to use a handout. That's something to keep in mind. Holding questions is good for at the end, because you want to, if you have to cover a whole bunch of material, you get through the material and then you talk about it at the end if there's any questions. The only time you would say it's okay to ask questions is if your talk is something that requires a lot of engagement, a lot of questions. You're the expert and it's more of a question-answer type forum. So that's the one thing to think about. The next thing is keep it simple and smooth. In other words, you keep it simple. It's an old way is keep it simple, Sal, or keep it simple, Sally, Susan. Too many times. I don't know how about if you've ever been to presentations where they have just, the slide is just covered with information. Sentence after sentence, the font is too small and it's hard to read. I've certainly had my share of presentations, and that is very difficult. You lose the audience right away. Your PowerPoint presentation should really have very simple points on it, and then you fill it in as a presenter. It also gives you leeway if you want to add more things to it. So keep it simple. Here's the other thing. It's good to use cartoons and pictures, but if you are going to use cartoons and pictures, know this. A cartoon, which is humorous, outperforms you than compared to anything you will say. So if you have a cartoon up there and then you're starting to talk about something, their attention has become divided. So if there's a cartoon up there and it's something funny, read the cartoon out to them. And you will together share in that laughter. You will connect with them. That funny is your funny, and you've connected. Don't start speaking until you've read that cartoon. If you have a series of cartoons, make sure that A, they can read it or can see the images, and then walk them through the series of cartoons if it's a story. But generally, you want to kind of avoid that unless it is a really good cartoon. So keep it simple. Don't add too much onto your PowerPoint. Here's the next big secret, and this is really important. I call it the reveal. It's called develop curiosity. If you look at this presentation and the previous presentations I've done, there's blank spots available. And I would literally almost say one of the worst things you can do is have a list of all the things you're going to talk about. Like I do this one talk on how to improve your energy, the 8 things that improve your energy. Now, if I have all those 8 things already listed, what are you going to do as an audience member? You're going to start reading all the 8 things, aren't you? I know I do. You start thinking, oh, okay, that's what that is, and you move on. But when you leave space there, you create curiosity. If you think about some of the best games, like the TV show games, like Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Trivial Pursuit, they have gaps in what you have to discover. These gaps create curiosity. And when you can even use that if you have an acronym and you just have the first letter, that might be a little bit of a tease for people to say, oh, I wonder what H stands for. Maybe H is water. Maybe that's what gives more energy. I wonder what S is. Maybe he's going to talk about sleep. And you have that built into an acronym, you're going to create that interest. This is probably one of the best things ever done, one of the things poorly utilized by presenters. Many presenters do not do this. It's probably the best part of this presentation is to use this aspect. The reveal, develop curiosity, and you will have people paying attention. Here's the other thing, the pitch and catch questions. When you talk to people and say, have you ever been in a presentation where the presenter is just talking and they're just reading through a whole bunch of material and that gets boring? When you start asking that question, people start thinking, yeah, I have, or no, I haven't. Or you're telling a story, you're saying, I don't know if you ever, had a childhood like this where your parents were never at home or they were struggling to make ends meet. And then they start thinking about their childhood. So once you start imposing that question, they start thinking. They say, yeah, maybe I did have a childhood like that. Or no, I didn't have a childhood like that. Ask, and I call it the pitch and catch, because you're throwing something into the audience, they catch it, and it's back and forth. Another good visual that I use to help remind me to engage in that is I think of a big beach ball, red or orange beach ball, and I imagine myself throwing it back and forth with the audience by asking them a question and then they're throwing it back, bouncing it back and forth. So ask them questions, and you get them involved. How many of you have ever, woken up only to discover that you were super tired and realized that there's no way you're going to make it to work that day? Or how many of you ever been, about to see a patient and you realize that you have 5 more patients and you had this emergency call and something you've forgotten? When you start doing that, people start saying, oh yeah, I've been there. Or no, I haven't been there. I can't relate. Engagement. Engagement is very crucial to a good presentation. And the other thing is use a framework. If you see everything that I've done, here I'm using some type of framework. When you use a framework, it's like a hanger, which allows you to hang information on. And that's what good frameworks do. That's what the 5 W's and the H. When you start thinking about that, you think, oh, okay, These are the things I got to remember about creating a good presentation. Frameworks are important. Frameworks are good when you're teaching a message or any type of presentation. There are a few more things I want to say. Look for the smiling faces and don't judge your audience. One of the things that creates nerves is when you look into the audience and you see people, concentrating, or they may not be smiling. And the tendency is to think they don't like what I'm saying, or I'm just, this is not resonating, or did I miss something? Do I have my zipper open? Do I got food on my face? Is my hair out of whack? You start having these doubts. But if you've made some friends initially and you find a smiling face, talk to that smiling face, because that'll keep you going. And it's good to divide the room up into threes: left, center, and right. And look for the smiling face in each of those sections. And so when you're talking to them, the audience will feel you're talking to everybody. And the other thing is, don't judge what the audience is doing. If you see somebody on their phone, they may not be ignoring you. They may be taking notes. They may be dealing with a personal crisis where their child is sick at home or whatever it is. So just try to leave the judgments behind. Don't start judging your audience, and look for the smiling faces. Vary your pitch, pace, tone, melody, and volume. That is the whole interview with me, with Roger Love, coming up next after this podcast, the following week or the week after. Vary your pitch, pace, tone, and melody. How many conversations have you had where they're just monotone? They're talking about an interesting topic, but it's just the same tone. There's no melody, there's no pause, and it becomes boring, and you start to fall asleep. Everything you need to know about delivery is really in that aspect there. Varying it up, speeding up, pausing, creating effect. When you pause, people hear it. One of the most common mistakes people make is they rush through things when they're speaking. They don't give time for people to absorb what you're saying. That's what the periods are. That's what the commas are for, so that they can start assimilating the knowledge that you are sharing with them. Vary your pitch, vary your pace, vary your tone, vary the melody, and the volume. And repeat the question from the audience. I don't know about you, but one of the most annoying things for me is you're in the back of the room or the middle of the room, and somebody asks a question at front, and the speaker starts talking to the person right at front and starts answering their question. That's pretty annoying. When you do that as a speaker, that's probably one of the rudest things you can do, because you've literally isolated the entire audience. You're just saying, it's just me and this person now. And I know that that's not people's intentions, but the best speakers say, thank you for the question, just so that everybody can hear. Jonathan or Catherine asked this question. They said, and then you repeat the question, and then you answer it. That's one of the best things you can do as a speaker. Repeat that question to the audience. And keep your answers short as possible. You want to make sure that things move along reasonably well. If somebody asks you a question that requires more in-depth information, just tell them, or it's maybe very specific to them, just say just tell that individual, I really would like to answer that question. It requires a little bit more detail, and I want to give you the time and energy for that. could we talk about that afterwards? Or I'm going to give you my contact information, and then maybe we can email if for some reason you can't come and talk to me after. And because if you don't want to be engaging in a question that may be so specific to that individual that it excludes the entire audience. Whatever you're speaking should benefit the entire audience, generally speaking, or benefiting most of the audience. If it doesn't, ask that person to see you after, okay? The last thing is leave your contact information. Let them know how they can get a hold of you if you want them to. Let them know. Say, if you want to get a hold of me, email me at lalit@theintroverteddoctor.com, and you get engagement that way. Many people do want to speak to the speaker. I don't know too many speakers that do not want to. They don't want to be. They don't want anybody to get a hold of them, and make sure that people can read it. Too many times the email is so tiny, the font is so tiny, people can't read it. Make sure the font that you have is legible for the person in the back of the room. And that's why knowing ahead of time how big your audience is and how big, because you're going to have to change the font. I had to speak one time in an audience for 1,000 plus people. I had to change the font to everything because it was going to be big PowerPoint, and I actually went into the stage, this auditorium, to see what it was like, and I looked at the font well ahead of time, because the font that I used in the general conference setting just wasn't going to cut it. Know where you're going to speak. Now, I hope that this video answered some of your questions, and the nervousness really turn to more relief, and that will settle. I guarantee you, if you use those key areas, you will give the best presentations that will be impactful and memorable. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen, and thank you for just being here. If there's any comments or questions, please contact me at theintroverteddoctor.com. You can also sign up on the website, and you'll get the weekly emails that I'll send you about each episode that's coming up. Coming up soon is the interview with Roger Love. Super excited about that, because that is one of the most powerful teachings that I've ever learned. I really feel you'll benefit from that greatly. And please leave a review on the website, on your Apple podcast or whatever platform that you're using. And until next week, I hope you have a fantastic day, and bless you in everything that you do. Thank you so much.